Hi. Hi, my name is Becky, and I'm a grateful Christian in recovery from addiction to drugs and alcohol. And please join me now for a quick prayer about our time together. God, we just thank you for all that you continue to show us and how to live fully in this life. We ask that the Holy Spirit open our hearts to hear your wisdom and truth this evening. I pray for the strength to be brutally honest with myself and others listening, that they might be strengthened with hope and that you will always get the glory. Only you are deserving of our praise. Amen. So, a little background about me. My early life. I grew up in a family of 5. I was the youngest of 3 girls. My mom taught high school, English, and my dad was a minister. I remember thinking that I had an idyllic childhood, and in many ways it was. But also in many ways, this was sort of a fantasy world that I built in my head to survive some really painful moments. One thing that my parents did do well was that I always knew that I was loved. And my parents were good about providing random praise. I lived in a really small town, and everyone knew everyone. And to me, it felt like my father, being a minister, came with some expectations and burdens. Now that I'm older, I do recognize that some of that was self-imposed. My adolescent and teenage years were I call them the glorious 1980s. Really big hair, as big as possible. Mine doesn't go that big, unfortunately, but lots of hairspray. And as a society, I feel like the fashion of that time probably represents what we were doing. We were putting on showy things and bright, and there was a lot of dark going on. And at the time, I thought that was just my world and that everyone else was really doing that amazing. I learned some of those coping skills also in my own family. We did a lot of that. Important things or upsetting moments would happen, and we would acknowledge them for an hour or two, and then literally go on like they had not happened. I think that my parents meant well with that. I really do. My dad had found out when my mom was pregnant with me that he would eventually go blind. He had started to have some vision loss, and they knew that it was a deteriorating thing. By the time I was 8, he had to stop driving, and he started to have multiple health issues, a couple of heart attacks, some leg surgery for some vein things. Again, we would visit him in the hospital and then go home and not really talk about it, not acknowledge what was really happening. When I was 7, I was sexually abused by a friend's older brother in our neighborhood. And even as a kid, I knew that was not supposed to happen, but also that it was not something that anybody really talked about. About that same time, I saw my father, who was a minister, kiss another woman, and began to sense that my parents' marriage was on shaky ground. It also did something, I think, to my psyche to think things are not really what they appear. They're not really safe, even if you may think they are. Again, none of these are things we talked about. I began to have a part of myself that I locked inside and a part that I presented to the world. I felt a lot of pressure not to add to my parents' pain, and I formed some really bad coping skills, keeping my true self hidden. So the good part about being raised by a minister who did have an authentic faith was that I did learn to love God really young, and I really did. That was genuine. I was confirmed when I was 8, and these are really special days to me when we do that in our own churches, because I can tell you that even at that age, there was something that touched me, and I knew I was not the same. I remember just feeling different. Jesus became especially real to me when I was in middle school, and I read the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Unfortunately, I approached my relationship with God in much the same way I did with people. I let him see most of what was going on, but held him at a comfortable distance. I had a lot of questions for God, and I didn't know that that was okay to talk with him about. I adopted the don't talk about it stance with God and Jesus. Or I talk deeply only in those really, really big emergencies. A friend was in a car accident. Lord, please help them. In high school, I read a small pamphlet called My Heart Cries Home. And it's a metaphor, and the author walks through each room of his home like it's his heart and helps Jesus see what might need to be changed. So, for instance, they go into the kitchen, and Jesus points out some of the things that might not be healthy to eat. They go through each part of it, and it kind of addresses each part of your life. And at the end, the last room they come to is the closet. And the author talks about his nervousness that Jesus is going to see what's in that closet. Because, in our closet, that's where we put the shoes we don't wear. And then eventually, sometimes I've even stuffed old food away there and didn't know, and then later wondered why there were fruit flies. So I remember reading this and thinking I could not even approach that closet myself. I definitely couldn't let Jesus see what was in there. And that's more kind of what was going on inside of me. I had all kinds of questions for God. Why did my father go blind when he was in a career serving God? Why am I sad? Why do bad things happen? Those kind of questions. My trust was broken with my human experiences. So I did marry my husband, Wes. I'm skipping ahead a little now, so we're going 80s into early 90s. Wes was in the video. He's homesick tonight. I married him 1 week shy of my 21st birthday. We met in college, and 28 years later, we are still married, and that is a miracle in itself. The marriage road has not always been easy. In some ways, we grew up together. We both came to our marriage with unaddressed wounds from our childhood and became enmeshed until we both really started our own healing journeys, which have really just been in the last 5 to 7 years. For much of our marriage, we argued like temperamental children instead of adults. We welcomed our son Caleb, who was also in the video, in 1999, and those were some really good years. And then in 2002, we actually lost our son Daniel. There was a picture also of his grave, to a condition called anencephaly. A few months prior to that, I was attacked in our home. I was able to get away, but it left sort of a scar in there. And I think going with this positive, sunny outlook thing, I said, well, he had a gun, at least we didn't get hurt, and my son and I got away, and I just really wanted to leave it there. Because I had been walking with God prior to my son dying, I experienced some real hurt with God and felt abandoned. Instead of talking to God honestly about it, though, I tried to keep going and thought maybe I could pray this away. My thought was if I just prayed enough, I would be healed. Meanwhile, I know now God was whispering, come know me, come get to know me. But all of these events worked like final cracks in my relationship with God. I just didn't understand. I tried to take my pain to God, but after 6 months, when my humanity saw no improvement, I decided I needed to take control of the situation. I also just had an opinion that I'm really not any good to anyone sad. And so I was ready to get over that. So this all started with psychiatric medications. I saw a psychiatrist, and eventually I was on 6 different psychiatric medications. That also added weight gain to weight that I already needed to lose, and a very low self-esteem. So again, I thought I could solve it. This time it was with a diet program. There were 3 to 4 different ones, and each time these were sort of crash things, so I'd maybe lose 30 pounds, and then the second, I started eating carbs or whatever it was, gain all that back and another 15 pounds. So I really thought I found the answer in 2007 at a local weight loss clinic. They use controlled substances for appetite suppression. Our Pastor Arlene, who is not here, did actually try to warn me at the time. I talked about the medication with her, and she said, that is like crack. Do not take that. And I just was like, okay, but yeah, I think it's okay. So that didn't go well, but It went okay for a couple of years, and I did lose some weight. But I do remember at the same time my pain was piling on from all these past hurts. And again, we're going all the way back into childhood, as I'm sure a lot of you can relate to. The first 30 minutes after I took that medication were absolutely always the best. My outlook was sunnier. My productivity would increase at work, or I would be able to clean up the house really fast. And I actually just thought I was a lot more fun on this medication. I had been depressed for years, and my skewed thinking felt like this medication actually made me better. I was a better mother, a better friend, better wife. After that, though, my memory gets fuzzy because addiction slowly worked its way in. I became very loose with what I used to think was an occasional glass of pink Moscato, and it turned into 1.5 to 2 bottles in a sitting. My father's parents were both alcoholics, so I had been warned about this long in life, but I guess I had gone enough period of time to think I'd be okay. I wasn't really vigilant about that, and I didn't realize how prone I would be to addiction. So this was all intermixed with stress going on at work. I counseled people who were dying for about a decade, and I felt a real responsibility to bring light and hope to them. Again, these kind of go back to my old childhood wounds that me just being serious is not really helpful or worth it to anybody. So I started relying on an extra diet pill before therapy sessions and was convinced it made me a better counselor. My relationship with God was more of last-minute prayers of distress. The diet pills quickly got out of control, and the behavior only sustained itself for a few months before I was reprimanded for irritability with my superiors. I do know that there was one day where I took at least 18 of these pills, and there are actually 6 as the maximum, and even that really can make you feel skittish is the best way to put it. At some point, I became stuck in a ridiculous and miserable cycle. Eventually, the pills made my skin feel like it was crawling, and I would then overcompensate with anti-anxiety medicine. My account was flagged at Walgreens due to these medications, and I was often practically begging for the anti-anxiety medicine. My dentist started to wonder what was happening to my teeth, started to decay quite rapidly. So at this point, it would seem clear that the writing was on the wall. 2 big things happened, though, that got me started on my recovery journey. One, I was written up at work, and it was for numerous things, but what became really clear was that I had an attitude problem, and I actually had not ever had this issue at work before, and I think that's what really got my attention. I could argue away most of the things they were saying, that my productivity wasn't good. Well, yeah, but they're expecting a lot. The thing I really couldn't argue with was who I was becoming, and it certainly wasn't someone I wanted to be. My marriage was holding on by a thread, and my husband Wes started to attend Al-Anon meetings and set some boundaries. And even worse than that was my emotional thought life. I had lost every shred of hope, and can honestly say I don't think I would have cared if I had died. Many days I found very little reason to keep going, but I was, again, sort of in that cycle. That was about as dark of a time as I have known. The second thing that happened was that I was fortunate enough to go on a trip to Israel with our church, right after being written up at work. God made it very clear to me that, like the Apostle Peter, I was drowning because I had taken my eyes off of Jesus. I even ended up getting a wooden, what do you call that, like sculpture from the company that we toured with that was the scene where Jesus is walking on water and Peter comes out to him, but Peter starts to drown, and he reaches out his hand, and he realizes it's because he took his eyes off of Jesus, and that was the particular thing that God showed me when I was there. So I prayed at the Western Wall, and I offered my life back to God. I prayed that he would show me the real way to live. And looking back now, I think this was the first time that I laid down my stubborn, self-centered will. When I returned, I got into counseling. My doctor released me from his care and started weaning me off all the medications. I should clarify, this was not because I was being heroic. This was because he realized there was a serious problem, and his office was getting flagged at Walgreens as well. So I wasn't really being noble, but it did actually work out. God worked that out in a good way. Later, I had to face the truth that I had manipulated this doctor to get what I wanted. So I begrudgingly started recovery meetings on August 8th, 2018. And I say begrudgingly because I thought surely there was like a once-a-week meeting and, like, is there something online? Or I just really thought there must be an easier way. I think in many ways I was in denial of how badly I needed what recovery was going to bring to my life. Sometimes at the beginning, I look back now and I think I was probably going because I knew the people in my life that were concerned about me would be happy with me going, not as much that my spirit was willing to be there. The great thing is that as soon as I was there, I started to, of course, learn something every day from everyone. Even though I felt a large dose of shame, and my spirit was fighting the process, part of me started to die each time I went, and it was uncomfortable, but I knew this is a part of me that needed to die. I'd been fighting to stay above water for so long that I didn't realize how much self and pride had worked their way into my heart. As I became aware of my own selfish behavior, that pain that I inflicted on others became evident, and that broke my heart. But within 24 hours of that, God had to point out to me in a meeting, somewhere in the 12 and 12, about addicts having a victim mentality. Because, of course, I could go down a whole nother rabbit hole about all the pain I had caused. And I think God just made it clear that it was time for me to grow up. Stop the whining. I think it's AWOL and Cape Coral has something that's, no whining here allowed kind of sign. And like I said, I had to grow up. I had and have many things to be grateful for, and I have learned to make a daily choice to see the good and remember the ways I've been blessed. As I said, God taught me something at every single meeting from day one. I started a little post-it, and I would write a little sentence, and then, of course, that quickly grew to a notebook piece of paper and then into a notebook. Not only that, but frequently, he would use someone who I, in my humanness, would have assumed had nothing to offer me. I've recognized I can learn something from anyone if I really pay attention and if I really learn to listen. I felt honored to be with the group of people who are searching and living meaningful lives with God's help. Given my history with my family not being open, I think I also felt honored to be where people were that honest. I mean, I think at the beginning I was like, people are really honest here. And of course, it probably took a good year before I got there myself, but I was inspired by their honesty, and it helped me grow as a human. The rooms of AA were the last place I would have ever hoped to be, but once I started to see how flared my ego was, I realized that these meetings were such a gift. I now include those in my gratitude list with God. I began loving a morning group that met at 7 a.m., and we would always, they did a big book reading on, I want to say, Tuesday, and 12 and 12 on Thursday, and I really found that there was so much still to be learned, and that the literature actually of AA is kind of amazing. It felt a lot to me, I always tell people, like an add-on to the Bible. So it didn't conflict with anything in there. It was just like, oh, it kind of like I had parents saying, now here's how you do that. Around 6 weeks in, it became clear that I would need to get a sponsor. It kind of felt like the point of no return to me, and I'm not sure my heart was all the way in there yet. But Pastor Arlene put me in contact with my sponsor, Alexis, who is here. And that was another frightening step. Vulnerability is really challenging for me. I am learning that, like with everything, with practice, it gets easier. My sponsor is extremely gracious and kind. Early on, I asked, when is it that I tell you all the worst things I've ever done? Somewhere in my head, it was like, that is like definitely the point of no return. Thankfully, she said now would be okay. And so I didn't have time to think about it or like really prepare, So I revealed all kind of my sickest points, and I think there is a part of each of us that thinks if someone really knew, they wouldn't want to know me, But she actually did not bat an eye. She kept coming back to meet with me, and I think my faith in humanity started to grow because this was a person, we did not have a connection other than Pastor Arlene. The 12 steps, though, have been life-giving and life-directing. I realized I have a ridiculously fragile ego, and I'll never grow until I can name these things and ask God to change them. I started also learning to take every thought to God. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, we demolish arguments and every pretension against the knowledge of God. And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. There were some things about me that, one of the, I would say, character defects of me is that there's times where I just get annoyed with people. And I kind of just thought that was me being a bad person. Now, it's not a good quality, but I started realizing, you mean if I go talk to God about that, he can actually change that. And that's been one of the better miracles he has done, I can honestly say, is that that I can stop and say, show me the beauty in this person, and he has come through every time with that. I am also learning to take all of my pain to the cross. I actually, at one point, envisioned when I was praying, just laying it down at the cross. Recently, it helps me if I have a vision. I don't know if other people are like that, but then I feel like I am actually there. And so one of the things I do when I'm in my bed is Jesus and I sit in sort of an oversized chair. And that has been such a really good time. Recently, my mom has started having strokes, and it's leading to vascular dementia. And Jesus has been so close to me and truly been such a good friend. Making amends, I can say, was a lot harder than I thought. My addiction really ran alongside my life in secret, and so each encounter involved me sort of explaining my low points to people and overthinking how they might react to me or not, and that's been a big part of the learning, is to let that kind of stuff go. By far, the hardest amends to make was with my mother. I have never felt skinny enough or pretty enough or talented enough or dressed well enough for her. In counseling, I realized that a lot of what I did as a teenager was to get her approval. She was the last person I made amends to. Actually, I've done one more since then, but for my mom, it became a 3-part episode. I kind of chickened out the first 2 times, and finally was able to tell my mom the whole story. And by the time I completed the full amends, I was able to recognize that I may not have been the easiest child to raise. It was enough that we could, together, as because I am a mother too, really find some good healing and understanding with each other. And that brought some real deep healing in me as well. About 2 months into my sobriety, I was worrying over many things, and God reminded me of the verse, trust in the Lord your God, and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. I had actually learned that as a kid, but I never really learned to apply it. And in particular this time, God was sort of highlighting the part, lean not on your own understanding. So again, it goes back to giving God my will. I hold a lot of shame at not being emotionally available, And, oh, I'm sorry. I missed a part. Lean not on your own understanding. Okay, let's go back. I was going to say, this is especially challenging as I wait for a slow healing process with my son, Caleb. He's now in college, and he's 22. But the years of my addiction were in his high school years, and that's taken some time, and I'm thankful he's been really honest about that. I told my story about a year ago at the Cape Coral campus, and I can happily report now that God continues to heal that in ways that shock and surprise me. One of the biggest things was for me to give it to God and for that to happen in God's time, not mine. I hold a lot of shame at not being emotionally available for him, and I had to confess to God that I still try to figure it out myself. I felt him encouraging me to give up that endless fight. My greatest lesson has come from step 3. As a reminder, we just said them, but this says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. When I started, I actually did not think that would be very hard. I thought that someone who married a minister was following God's will. I didn't realize how much I was holding of my will. I added a lot of addendums to God's directives. I held a lot of myself back. It was a big trust issue, and I felt like if I really gave him everything, I wasn't sure what he would do with it. It came from my broken view of God and my limited understanding, and my lack of submission to his healing. As I've been able to give that up and work on that, he's been able to come in and heal. I've learned to lay down my will every single day, and I also pray for strength to give it up more. I've learned to kind of have a barometer on my will, and I can tell sometimes when it's getting a little too strong. The same thing with my ego I've found too, and I know if my ego starts roaring around, it will lead to my destruction, and I know now that is the last thing I want to happen. After some years, I began to realize that God was telling me that I was like Peter, I mentioned that, but there may be some other implications. Peter's biggest thing is his pride, and so I'm finally learning to just recognize this. I was almost like too proud to admit that I had pride because I don't really want to, but I'm recognizing that in myself, and my daily submission and prayers to God are not my will, but yours be done. So to summarize, I have to say that recovery has been the greatest journey of my life. It's brought healing, and it's brought me back to the heart of Jesus. One last quick story talked about my son that died. I did something called theophostic prayer, and this is where someone takes you through your deep points of pain. And God actually showed me that day that I cried and was holding my son. But this time when he showed it to me, Jesus was holding me like a child, and I was holding my child. And I realized that he had not left me, that these were lies I believed. These were parts of me that just wouldn't trust. So I'm learning not to stuff it, and I'm learning to talk about it, and most importantly, I'm learning to sit with Jesus. The last thing, God has renewed my will to live and seek his purpose for my life. He is rebuilding my marriage, and he's restoring my family relationships. He can do the same for you, and he can bring deep healing for you, and I pray that you find that tonight. Thank you.